Thank you very much. Hi. I thought, before we start with the actual panel, I'd do a little bit of an introduction into generative AI, because in my experience, not everybody is on the same page when it comes to that, and so then when we start the panel discussion, everybody is on the same page. As you already said, ChatGPT was released almost exactly 2 years ago, right? And it was the tool that brought AI into the public perception. You know, all of a sudden, everybody could interact with AI, and the entry barrier was lowered so that everybody could really use it, right? And this ability of generative AI to converse in natural language is really, really impressive. I think we can all agree on that. What it was also really good at is summarizing and analyzing large documents, right? For example, annual financial reports. You know, all of a sudden, you could ask Copilot or whatever you want to use, just give it a PDF, and you could ask it, please give me the revenue for 2023 of this report, right? And you don't need to scroll through it anymore, and you would usually get a correct answer out of it. And a lot of people played around with this, and this sparked the question. I heard that several times in the last 2 years. Do we still need XBRL? You know, we can just put all our PDFs that we've loved so much into Gen AI, and then we can get all the data out of it that we want. So that's why, you know, I know AI has been around for a while, has been used for a while in the form of machine learning and everything like that, but there the entry barrier was a lot higher, right? And you needed data experts to work with this kind of AI. So that's why today we want to focus a little bit on generative AI. And before we start with the discussion, I want to explain a little bit how this works, so we're all on the same page, right? So why 2 years ago? Why is now the time for generative AI? One thing that we need for generative AI is data, huge amounts of data, right? So it has proven the more data we have to train these models, the better these models become, right? And now we have almost 4 decades of data on the internet, right? That can be used for training. It's not only that's being used for training, but this really is the foundation of everything that these models have learned. And also we have 6 decades of Moore's law that has given us the computing horsepower to train these models and to interact with these models. That's also something that hasn't been there forever, right? And then also, of course, also in the last decades, the field of AI has progressed with different techniques. For example, this reinforcement learning, human feedback. But the real breakthrough and the thing that enabled ChatGPT is this paper from Google, Attention is All You Need. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on this now. So how does it work? The next few slides are based on an article from the Financial Times, Generative AI. Just Google Financial Times Generative AI. I can really recommend it. It's very basic explanation and interactive explanation of how this works. So if what I do doesn't suffice, please have a look at this and then you will understand, right? So as I said, the current foundation models have learned on almost the entirety of the internet, right? And in these big models, they can observe words in the context with each others, right? So for example, they end up with huge sets of words that can be found alongside another word, and which sets of words that are not alongside other words, right? Here's an example. So interest, you will find the word interest alongside words like interest rate, I have no interest in, right? Genuine interest, public interest, stuff like that you will find in the vicinity of the word interest in all the data the models have been trained on. What you probably will not find that often is purple interest or interest clouds, interest whispers, right? So that's basically how these models are trained and how they can understand what you want, right? So, self-attention, how does it work? If you give an input to ChatGPT, self-attention looks at each token. So a token can be a word, can also be a little bit less than a word. In this example, I just made it, 1 token is a word, right? And then it looks at all the other tokens in the input and sets it into relation to the current word it's looking at, right? And then it decides which of these words are most important to understand the meaning of this word based on the training data. And it does this for all words in the input. right? And it does that in parallel. That's why we also need a lot of computing power for this to work in time. And then it can assess the whole sentence at once, and in this case, figure out that interest is, in this case, it's not interest rate, but it's interest in the case like I don't have interest in politics. I personally start to lose interest in politics these days, but that's another topic. And this also works if you have interest multiple times in a sentence. So in this example, for example, we have interest in 2 different meanings, and this also works with the current generation of large language models, right? So in the first example, it's more along the lines of encouragement, enthusiasm, and in the second part, it's more along the lines of profits and dividends, right? So the large language models understand the different meaning of words, even if they are in one sentence, based on all this data that they have learned on. If they produce output, and that's really the important bit, right? It's a little bit of a simplified way how LLMs create answers, right? But it illustrates how it works. So, for example, we have an input that says quantum mechanics is A. And then they get us, based on what they've learned, they get back a set of words with probability. So what's the most probable word to follow the sentence that already is there? In this case, it would, for example, be fundamental, and then we go on, and the next thing can be branch, and then the next thing is fundamental branch of, right? And then we get the whole output based on this. It's, of course, as I said, it's a little bit simplified. Modern LLMs do not do that word by word. They do something that's called like a beam search, so they create multiple sentences, and then they try to find out which is the most probable one. And it's also not that easy, right? We all know if we ask ChatGPT the same things 2 times, we'll get a slightly different answer. And that's where this temperature thing comes in. Temperature is not something that you can use in your phone app, ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever you use. I actually don't know what the default value there is. But if you have like developer access to these models, then you can change the temperature. And I think the default is 1, right? And 1 will introduce a little bit of randomness in the selection of these words, right? So even though the most probable word for quantum mechanics is fundamental, it might choose a different word. Like it might choose set, might choose branch, and it still can get sentences that make sense. If you put the temperature down to 0, then it will mostly follow the most probable word. If you put the temperature to 2, for example, then after a few words you will get complete chaos, right? And then this is really because you want to use LLMs for different purposes, right? If we are working in the financial sector, we need accurate data, then we want to put it to 0, for example. If you want to create a poem, then you might need a 1, right, to create something new. Then where are we going with all this, right? So I think the goal for all of the research labs, especially for AI, is to create AGI, so an artificial general intelligence. Some call it also powerful AI. It's a term, right? But one definition is that AGI is an AI that matches or surpasses human cognitive capabilities across a wide range of cognitive tasks, right? So it's AI that can do everything that we can do, basically, right? And OpenAI has defined 5 steps in reaching this AGI. The first thing we all know, right? Conversational AI, that's basically ChatGPT. The second thing are reasoners, so AIs that can deduct, that can reason themselves to a solution that in most cases makes more sense and also answer more complex questions. The third levels are agents, so then we come into autonomous systems that work without the input of a human being, right? And that they can distribute work between different AIs that are specialized on different tasks. And then we come into level 4, which is already a little bit of science fiction, right? So they AIs that can develop new ideas themselves, right? They don't just repeat what they have been trained on. And then the last thing is organizers, so AIs that can really coordinate, can do the work of whole organizations themselves, basically. Most people think we're still on level 1, but that's not the case anymore. OpenAI published this O1 model in September, right? And that's already a model that can do reasoning. if you have the chance to try it, I can really recommend it. It's mightily impressive. You not only get it takes a little bit longer to get an answer. It takes maybe 30 seconds or something, right? You don't get an answer right away. But the answer you get usually makes sense. If you get code back, it's usually code that compiles. And it also gives you a description of how it got to the answer, right? How it deducted that this is the right answer. Level 3 is also something where, for example, Microsoft is currently releasing new tools every time they have a presentation, right? So agents that can autonomously work, like the Microsoft Copilot, you can set it to listen to your emails, and then based on the content, it will send this email to person X or person Y, right? So we are already getting into level 3 territory. And I really agree with what Joe said yesterday. So I think short term, or maybe now, AI might be a little bit overhyped, but in the long term, it's definitely underhyped. I think the potential with these technologies is really, really, really incredible. One example I want to show here. This is the XBRL tagger from Lucanet, and we all know text block tagging takes a lot of time, right? Some of our customers need 3 days to tag it. And here we use generative AI together with a few other techniques, and then it does the narrative tagging itself, basically. And it can tag reports up to 100 pages in 2-3 minutes. And then all you have to do as a human being is to check if these tags are right. Of course, they're not right all the time, right? You might get 80% right, and you definitely have to review all of the tags because you are still accountable for the result. But if we look at 3 days' work and maybe half a day's work, that makes a lot of difference, right? It frees up your work for doing all the other tasks that you need to do, because let's face it, reports that have to be created by the clients just get more and more and more, right? So this is really one use case of generative AI that really makes sense, that brings value to the customers. And I think that's where we need to go in the future, right? Gen AI is not just a chatbot. You can really use it for things like that. And that's also just the first step, right? You can probably automate the whole tagging process with generative AI. We're trying in our tool, we're trying these things in different areas. For accuracy, as I said, they're not 100% accurate. You definitely have to review everything afterwards, but it definitely saves a lot of time. And this we already released beginning of October as a internal test for partners and customers, just to show you the possibilities that we can do real things with generative AI. And I also think that generative AI and XBRL really complement each other, right? If we look at the pros and cons of the technologies, we already said like generative AI is a little bit, depending on the temperature, it's a little bit inaccurate, it hallucinates. With XBRL, we always know that the data is accurate in the sense that the filer has signed off on it, right? Generative AI is quite complex. These models are black boxes. We don't know what's happening, and they cost quite a lot, right? XBRL is getting cheaper and cheaper. Every year, more tools, easier tools. We can build on what we already have. It's really not that expensive anymore. I already mentioned, these AI models are black boxes, and what XBRL, the core of XBRL is transparency, right? So you can trust the data that comes out of it. You also cannot use generative AI for, if you need to submit your report or to a regulator, or if the regulator wants to get reliable data out of a report, you cannot use generative AI because there's no regulatory background for that, right? Who has the accountability, the responsibility if the data is wrong, right? The model creators, OpenAI, is it the regulator? So that's again where XBRL comes in, right? If you have XBRL data, you can be certain this should be correct, right? But where generative AI is good at, it's good at automation, it can help you tagging, it can help you analyze the data. And then we come to one of the downsides of XBRL is that it's quite complex to analyze, to tag. It takes a lot of time. So these two really, really fit very well together. With this background, let's go over to the panelists. Let me introduce them. Bjorn Fastabend is the head of XBRL at the collection processing unit at the German regulator BaFin. We have Mary Tinnelley, who headed up Ark's inline XBRL team and was responsible for taking off over 6,000 reports, I think, for ESEF, HMRC, Companies House, and Irish Revenue. And today she's Ark's Strategic Partnership and Alliances Manager. We have Dennis Munkle, a last-minute stand-in. We originally had someone from AWS in Spain, a true Gen AI expert who couldn't make it. But Dennis agreed to join us today, so it's a little bit thrown into cold water here today. He's the CEO at Reportix, a member of the XBRL Standards Board, and has a focus on business intelligence and data management. And we have Marc Houllier, the CTO at Corporatings, a data provider that specializes in leveraging highly structured XBRL data. And I think we can all agree, the one and only XBRL data expert that we all have. So please come to the stage. All right, we start with Bjorn. Here's another microphone.
You know?
Yeah, I think so. Good. Bjorn, you do have a ton of XBRL data, right? What do you do with it?
That's a very good question. I'd like to know too. No, primarily we store them, of course, and I mean we pass them on to our supervisors for analysis. You know, so XBRL is a very important data format that we use because of the structured format, because of the validity. I mean, I don't have to preach to you guys. You guys probably all know the benefits of XBRL. We do too, and that's why we like to receive it.
And how can AI support you analyzing the structured data?
Yes, that is a dream, actually. I mean, this is my personal idea, basically. What I envision is that currently we're using, of course, BI tools to analyze this, and not all of the supervisors are technically, capable to use and work with AI as much as others. So having a natural language tool available where you can actually query the document or the filing with your natural language, it's a very low level of knowledge that's required for this. So I would assume that having an AI tool available and actually talking to your reporting would make it a lot easier and a lot more, wider range of supervisors being able to use it out of the box without having any training. And of course, the key is reliable data. You mentioned this. That's why I think where XBRL can shine, because the structured data and the structured nature of it should be able to make it much more reliable in terms of AI. At least that's my hope.
Yeah, maybe Marc, you are very, I think you're dabbling with this for quite a while already. So how can AI help with the analytics of XBRL financial data?
Right. Many actors are involved in the analytics of financial data. So first, us as a data provider, we need to collect data which is in different formats. Some of it is in XBRL and already precise, and some of the other data that users require is in other forms, either just in text or the user just wants for more classification. So the first step that we use for AI is not directly Gen AI, but perceptive AI, where we'll try to classify or detect some data and then collect it, right? That's the first step as a data provider. Then the user, they have to query that data into a database or into other services that we provide. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of operations users want to do. So if they get into just our services, there are a multitude of different functionalities that they can go through, either select some precise data or select a specific metric and dimensions, or they could do a benchmark, or they could do into a search of text. This is really very complex for financial users to use, and they don't even know the language that's behind the specific database we use, right? They don't know, for instance, in XBRL, they don't know the technical names behind the elements in the taxonomies. So giving to them an AI that understands the queries and translate that into technical queries and selection of which services they need to use to get the answer is something that is really useful and is probably the most widely used kind of AI in financial services. I think most of the people in financial services who try to use AI, they started just trying to use Gen AI directly on the documents. But as we've seen, there are issues with accuracy that are not acceptable for financial users. So in the end, that reverts to using only GenAI to translate a query into precise, accurate queries that are then executed, and the answers are given back to users. I think that I've seen Bloomberg usually start with just GenAI and then move to these sort of queries. We are doing that. I think it's really the most common, and that's going to stay, right? In the end, financial users will always want accurate data, so they will need that. The AI will just help them translate their needs into specific technical aspects.
So structured data really is the key into using AI for analysis there.
Yes, I mean, not only because people want precise data, but also because GenAIs require data to be trained, right? In the first place, you need to have some precise human interpretation if you want to give to users some data that corresponds to what they would themselves find, right? Especially because in the finance world, there are many different standards. So the GenAI that will be trained just on the internet and on sets of data, they will have many different answers for what is revenue, what's property, plant, and equipment, what's even a provision. And you need to have a specific reference to a specific standard to give that answer. And XBRL, of course, makes these kind of differences. XBRL is also versioned. That's also an issue that comes with when you train on general set of data. You get training data that comes from many different periods. So the answer that's going to be generated would, of course, depend on, or will be a mix of different versions of the standard that are not necessarily applicable. If you use and mix the GenAI with XBRL data, you will, for instance, also make sure that you are giving the right version of answer.
Okay. So, Bjorn, hearing all this, do you think there's an alternative to structured data?
Alternative to structured data. Okay, we're at an XBRL conference here. Let me take a wild guess. I would say no. Is that a correct answer? No, but seriously, I mean, yeah, of course, I still cringe whenever we do get reports or when a new mandate is set up and PDFs are used for narrative reporting. I think, why go this way if we have IRXBRL that combines the best of both worlds? And it's you know, I really don't understand. I mean, of course, we do still receive unstructured data, and I don't think it's going to stop completely, but that's another hope that, you know, maybe with the use of AI, we can combine the two, the unstructured and the structured, and actually merge them together in the AI model and have one tool to analyze both. Because, I mean, ChatGPT has shown how much it's able to interpret and analyze unstructured data fairly well. And so that might be an additional use case for using AI tools to leverage this. Because, I mean, like I said, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon as much as I preferred, but yeah, it's still there. It's going to be there, but I don't know. It's not the good data, right?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Dennis, so when we speak about generative AI and structured data, how important is structured data when we use generative AI, and how can we best leverage this?
I think this was already answered by Marc almost. So it's very important, I guess, right now for the training of the data. It's basically essential to train the generative AI. Maybe one thing to note is that generative AI is just one application of AI, of many, and one use case. And I would even argue, I mean, we are all aligned that we really need structured data somehow, and it's almost too easy. I would even argue that for generative AI is the least important to have structured data from all the AI use cases that we have. Right now, it's essential to actually train the generative AI, but maybe at some point, the generative AI will be trained to a level that is good enough to even not use structured data anymore, or not required to use structured data anymore. I had a nice discussion yesterday with Richard about this, and I think he shared somewhat the same opinion. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, Richard, but yeah, I think for generative AI, it's not even super important, but right now for the beginning of generative AI, it is very, very important, yes.
So yeah, maybe I can expand on this a little bit. we did some tests internally, right, in Lucanet, and it's not really XBRL related, but it's really if you want Gen AI to do things that you want to do it and not give you answers that you don't really need, then it's really important if it interacts with systems like with your software, to have data that is data and APIs that is as descriptive as possible, right? The more descriptive your APIs are, then you can just basically give your APIs to generative AI, say, okay, this is the things you can work with, and then based on this, create a chatbot that can interact with your system, right? And the more metadata you have for all the functionality and also the data you maybe want to analyze, the better the results are, right? If you have dimensions in a system, again, not XBRL, right? But if you have dimensions in the systems that don't have descriptive names and no description, you will never get generative AI to give you a proper answer based on the data that's in the system, right? So you need to have labels, maybe document labels, references to the regulation and all of these things to really get the best out of Gen AI when people work with it that don't know the technicals below, right? So I think it's really, really important to have this descriptive data. So.
Just since we're on the topic right now, I mean, my colleague Gerhard, he recently coined this phrase that I really like about it. So if you load the taxonomy train a model with the taxonomies, you basically enable AI to go from guessing to knowing, because it has the structure, it knows how the data is going to be delivered and how it's going to be interpreted, and it knows exactly where to find what. And I think that's key, and that's really important, and it would be very helpful to have that kind of stuff. So
exactly, and you can also, we tried this as well. You can give it with ChatGPT, you can create these assistants, right? And you can give it additional data. And what you can do is just give it the ESRS taxonomy. It can do XBRL, but you can give it to it as in JSON or HTML. It doesn't really matter. And then the whole regulation of ESRS as a PDF. And then you can give it just an extraction. Okay, please connect the references from the XBRL taxonomy to whatever you find in the PDF. And then you can ask it, please give me the reference text from the regulation for this tag. And it can do that, right? Because it understands, okay, this reference belongs to this part in the PDF. And then you can turn it around and say, please, for this tag, for this narrative tag, please write me a template on what I should write. And that also works, right? So it's a really, really powerful tool. Based on this, Dennis, I'm sorry. When does it make sense to use generative AI in the financial and sustainability sector? And in what are the use cases?
So the generative AI business, I guess, is an imprecise business, and you basically are fighting for precision, trying to increase the precision all the time. That's why you train these models. But there are use cases out there which require precision, and so they are very much geared towards precision. And in that case, you cannot use generative AI, or I would not use it or recommend using it. One example would be, for example, if you want to derive some ESG scores. That's maybe a good example, because the variance of ESG scores that exist right now is so huge, and this is just because the source data is so variant as well. And so you require structured data, which is also assured, which has all these levels of assurance, to make it actually more reliable to have these ESG scores, to have at least, at the end, several people are calculating ESG scores. They should come to the same conclusions in the end. And this can only work if you have precision on every levels, because especially when you derive data, these some very small errors, they stack up a lot, and it becomes to a level that is unusable. And for these use cases, you cannot use generative AI. Also, the word itself already tells us what it is. It's generative, so it creates something, and specifically it creates content. And I would say maybe that this content is mainly geared for humans. So any use case where the human is the direct recipient of the outcomes of the AI, then Gen AI is a good thing to use. But I understand also that Gen AI, because it's for humans and it feels like a human almost, this sparks a lot of fear to people, of course. I can also understand this. But if the technology is better understood, it can be leveraged very, very nicely and can be very powerful. One good example is is the publishing sector. The publishing sector can use Gen AI in a very powerful way. For example, when a new financial report comes in, the Bloombergs and so on, they can use Gen AI to almost immediately create a summary of the report and then publish this to the world. I mean, this is very, very powerful and useful. And also, even the financial report creation itself, it makes a lot of sense because this is also a narrative. You can produce these reports with the help of Gen AI. It's a perfect use case. But it's mainly for humans. It's not for machines, I would say.
Okay, so it's for humans. Mary, you used to work closely with hundreds of clients in tagging their reports. What do you think of the impact, what the impact of AI will be on issuers?
I think at the moment, a lot of the issuers we work with, and we work with issuers, a lot of our client base in the UK, we work with issuers in about 12, 13 jurisdictions across the EU, is that a lot of them are still afraid of XBRL. A lot of them still don't understand XBRL, and I think AI will give us, or give the issuer some comfort over the tagging of the report and how to digest the information. But in addition to that, I think AI will increase the use of the tagged reports by other stakeholders. Regulators use the tagged reports, but how many other stakeholders use the tagged reports? So I think we will see an increase in that. And if we see the likes of investors using the tagged reports, that will increase the tagging, the level of tagging that is input into these reports at the moment. We'll also see issuers, I think, using the tagged reports themselves when they see how beneficial they can be. We have one client that currently uses the Corporatings tool, and they use 3 or 4 of their graduate team to digest the information manually from PDFs of their peers and competitors' reports. That has been reduced by one graduate doing it in half a day. So that's going to increase over the coming years. So I think it's an exciting opportunity. It's not as scary, I don't think, as issuers as XBRL is. So I think we'll see a lot of exciting developments happening with issuers over the coming years.
Sounds good. And what about you? Like, you do tagging as a service for a lot of your clients. Will it make your life easier?
Yes, and I think it needs to make our life easier. So from our aspect, at the moment, we're manually tagging reports, which is quite a time-consuming process. So I think, yeah, it will automate some of that tagging process. It's not going to fully replace the human in there. If we look at the financial statements at the moment, and of course we work with Lucanet, we've done some testing on their AI functionality. It's not a true replacement for a human tagging. And the reason being is that it's easy to match revenue to the revenue tag, but there's disclosures in the report that we have to go and read the notes to that disclosure to fully understand that issuer's disclosure in the report. Or sometimes it's even a conversation with the issuer themselves so that we can understand what tag is the most appropriate for that disclosure. So AI can't currently do that. However, it is absolutely going to make our process more efficient. With the tagging going to lead to other areas of the report, with sustainability becoming digital in the coming years, we need more efficiencies. So I think, yes, in some aspects it's going to make it more efficient. Sustainability is not going to be there yet, but it gives us the opportunity then to refocus our efforts to the sustainability reporting. It's also an exciting opportunity because what else can be tagged? If we can automate the tagging that we're doing on the financial statements at the moment, what else can we tag in the future when sustainability becomes more automated, etc.?
Thank you. So now that Gen AI maybe also supports tagging of reports, Marc, you're always very keen on improving data quality in reports. Can AI improve data quality?
So we use AI to monitor the quality in our database. So we get the content, and when we collect reports, sometimes the data is not going to be exactly correct in it. But we don't use AI directly as a way to correct or directly detect errors. We use AI to detect patterns in reports of common errors, and then we use human analysis and we confront that with the business rules to verify whether the information is correct or not indeed. Because in the domain of financial analysis, there are many cases where exceptions are expected, right? There are many different sectors, many different reasons why things can be unusual. So I don't think AI, with its ability to detect unusual patterns, for instance, is going to directly solve the issue of data quality, but it's been very helpful to us to come up with actual ideas about data quality rules. Though on that, again, I would warn against the fact that sometimes report common practice deviates from the standards so much that AI is going to think that a common pattern is normal, and it will fail to detect something that is just a data quality issue that is common practice, right? If you followed my post on LinkedIn, I talked about a story, I think it was a few months ago, where the AI had detected a common pattern, and we started trying to use that as a way to detect errors. But it turned out that the 93% of companies were using the wrong data in their reports, right? It was not about tagging XBRL, right? It was just about the data they put in their reports. So I think it's really important to just use AI as an assistant, you know, just to help you see and decide which rules you are going to use for data quality as a human, but not just rely on it to make the decision for you. Which is the same, I think, for GenAI, by the way. When I hear things, I'd like to say, please don't use GenAI to put content into your financial reports. If you have to write an accounting policy, please don't generate it. Please say what your accounting policy is, and that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Also, we had when we compared the reports that have been created by the XBRL Copilot with the actual tagging of the human tagged reports, then sometimes you have to ask yourself the question: maybe the AI is more right than the human, right? Because the humans are also not always right. Based on this, Mary, management always remains accountable for their disclosures, right? Including also for their digital disclosures. Will AI co-piloting, so not relying solely on AI, but also having the human in the loop, right? Will that maybe help management be more confident in the tagging decisions that have been made by you or by the clients directly when they have been recommended by an AI tool and an external team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think an issue that we're having at the moment, as I'm sure many of our peers in the industry are also having, is issuers taking full ownership of their digital disclosures. I think there's still a huge focus on the disclosures that go into a PDF report, and the digital disclosures are a second thought. We have some issuers that we work with more on the UK side where there's no mandated requirement for assurance, but they'll come into us a few days before their filing deadline with their report. We'll tag it, send it back to them, and a half an hour later it's on the national storage mechanism. So they're not reviewing their report. So I think anything that can assist issuers to review the tagging decisions in the report will be hugely beneficial. But of course, you also need that human interaction in there too. So yeah, ultimately, I think it's a great step towards issuers taking full ownership of their digital message. As I've already said, it is going to lead to other stakeholders using it, so that will also push issuers taking ownership.
And again, back to Marc. Do you see this differently? I mean, your tools are also used by auditors a lot. Will GenAI or AI in general and XBRL also help the audit community in the long run?
I think so, and it also helps us when we try to address data quality issues with issuers. It helps us convince them that the issues we detect are actual concerns. When you look at XBRL data and you say, I think this is wrong and you should solve it, and you just show like the rule in the reporting manual or something like that, it's hard to have that discussion. When you plug the reports, including the XBRL tax, into an AI and you say, how do you understand the report? And it gives the answer that is not what the management expects, it's much easier to convince the client that yes, they are doing things wrong, right? So I think that can help, and that's exactly what Mary said in confirming the understanding of the report. So in that way, yes, I think very much I would expect that to help also, for instance, auditors understand the materiality possibly of a concern, because usually they have to make judgment on whether an anomaly, for instance, will have an impact on whether the report is still understandable or can impact decision on investors. And for now, it's really hard to have a view on, well, what's going to be the average reaction of an investor. Is the anomaly going to be misleading or not? On that, Gen AI can bring a sort of average view of the report, average understanding, and help decide whether or not things can be understood differently from what was intended, or from the truth.
Bjorn, do you think that regulators will start using services like AI-based services that, for example, Marc's company, I think also Dennis' company offer in assessing or improving data quality and maybe also in the creation of analytics of XBRL data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the key for that would be, of course, accuracy. We definitely need a high precision rate. I mean, it's not enough to have like 85% or so precision or accuracy and you know, make a decision based on that could affect a company's situation. So that it's absolutely essential that we do have high quality data that we would get through XBRL as it is, and of course it needs to be the output of the AI tool would have to be accurate and highly reliable. But yeah, absolutely. With the volume of data that we're receiving, I would definitely see great benefits. And then, like I mentioned earlier already, like for analysts, that would make it easier. The level of interacting with the data would be a lot easier. And this is something I've been advocating for a long time. I think XBRL is a great format, but it's too technical and needs to be simplified. And having a tool like AI where you just interact with it in natural language would be a great, equalizer in that sense, where you don't really have to care with what kind of data is behind it or how it's structured or anything like that. You just talk to it and write it in complete normal language in the terms that you use in regular day-to-day business. And I think that would be really, really essential and really big help for us to make it more widespread use of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Dennis, I know I'm throwing you a little bit into the cold water with this, but do you think there will be a point in time where we can hand off decisions and accountability to AI?
Janis, thank you for this question. This is a very painful question. It actually it contains a lot of the fears that actually exists because it has a lot of implications between the lines, so it makes a lot of assumptions, so it's very hard to answer. Still, I can give you my opinion. So maybe I address the accountability first, and maybe I see this as a legal accountability. So can AI be legally held accountable for a decision if it was making a decision? I think not, because the legal system works with punishments, and how do you punish an AI for doing something illegal? I mean, you could remove some CPU from the AI just to punish it, but maybe this is possible in the future. However, I don't think it will. Also, we have to ask maybe Alex if we can have AI registered for an LEI maybe to make it legally accountable. I don't think that will be possible, no. Your first part was about whether we can hand off the decisions to AI. For me, my understanding of decisions is that something is not only decided but also enforced. And I think generative AI cannot enforce anything. There's always someone who is actually a legal entity who can enforce something, but AI, as I just said, I don't believe it can be legally accountable, so I don't think it can enforce. But what it can do is it can always make suggestions for legal entities, whether that's a private person or a company, and this legal entity can then enforce the decision. But this indirection will also in the future exist. I think it's not possible to hold it accountable and not to let it enforce decisions. I don't think it's possible directly, no.
I do agree, but there's a little bit of maybe a parallel to self-driving of cars, right? So, for example, if you use the full self-driving mode in a Tesla and it crashes, then it's your responsibility. But there's also, I think from Mercedes, they have like level, I don't know, there's also different levels of self-driving. They have a level 2 or level 3, something that they are allowed to use in Europe. And it only works in certain situations. It only works up to 90 kilometers per hour or something, right? But then when something happens, then Mercedes is to be held accountable for this, because that's a different kind of legislation. So there is maybe ways to hold the companies behind accountable, but it's hard to grasp. I agree. Again, cold water question. We talked about AGI and the road to AGI. When will we have it?
This already implies that we will have it, which is not certain. I cannot answer this with certainty, of course, but I can give my own opinion. I think it will be there maybe in between 5 and 50 years, but this is only a guess. You know, you cannot. And also, there's so many levels of quality. It can be complete crap. You know, it's you cannot know. But this is the start, you know. But I think it will be there. It will be a combination of several AI applications, not only Gen AI. Gen AI is maybe then the interface for conversation with humans, but other AI use cases have also been applied in this case. And so it's a combination of all of these. But yeah, I think we will have it. It will be less scary than we maybe think at this point, because it's just overly scarified, if you will. Yeah.
I also think it's a question of the definition, and then it will also be a gradual iteration into this, right? So it will not come with a bang, probably. Marc, you want it?
Yes. I would like to say the AGI is the nuclear fusion to nuclear fission. You know, it's in the 70s, nuclear fusion was 5 years away, but it has common points, but it's a completely different technology. You know, AI is at the reasoning stage, like it can make reasonings, but to do AGI, you have to interact with things that are not going to use the same technology, right? So it's a completely new development, and you cannot predict what's going to go with just what we have, right? We have to come up with new sorts of development, and well, that may not happen in the next century.
Yeah. So we are almost at the end. Thank you very much for the participation. We may have time for 1 or 2 questions. Is there any questions in the audience? I will just get up to keep that mic.
This question is for Bjorn. You had mentioned early on about getting a taxonomy into a large language model. And so I'm responsible, my team is responsible for the US GAAP taxonomy in the US. So I've been asking this question wherever I can ask it, because I'm really keen to understand what we might need to do different, or what we might need to do to enhance the taxonomy. And this would also apply to the filings themselves. What would need to be done in this space to enhance their utility from a consumption perspective? And I get the impression you've been thinking about this as well.
So let me see. So you're looking to improve the taxonomy for consumption? And
So if the taxonomy is in a large language model, what should be done to optimize it for that purpose, right?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I would assume that, this is my naive assumption here, that the large language model would be automatically able to understand the taxonomy, basically. I've done this reversed way. So what I did basically, I took a PDF with some kind of financial data, and I threw it into ChatGPT. I was like, turn this into an XBRL file, just to see if it could do it. And it's like, okay, I'm going to assume this is US GAAP, and I'm going to create file. And it did, and within seconds, you know, and it just completely interpreted the financial structure, knew what XBRL is, and turned it into an XBRL file. It was just an example, but it worked. And so I would assume if you have an XBRL taxonomy, just throw it in there, say, you know, this is my training data. I mean, of course, I'd use it for training data, and I'm expecting these and these filings, and I'd like to interpret them. So, you know, use this as basis to understand how the files are going to be structured, and then you can interpret and can actually engage with the files much easier, because it should, my assumption again, based on that previous training, already know, okay, on this form I'm going to find this, and the assets are going to be found right here, and this is going to describe the asset. These are the dimensions used and all that good stuff. So I personally wouldn't expect it to really need too much, prepping on your part. I would just simply try and see how does it work. You throw the stuff in there, and what kind of response do you get? But what I was getting at actually is training a model specifically for XBRL usage. So having the taxonomies that you're receiving, having them trained on a model specifically for that purpose, and so that it's pre-trained on what you're expecting.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
I can maybe also give a answer to Louis' question. We've been doing some testing as well to try to see whether we could directly plug taxonomies into GenAI and then ask questions of documents. Our initial findings with taxonomy and with instances is that the GenAI is just going to read the names of the elements, for instance, and mostly reason on the schema, but it had a really hard time learning on the link basis, although most of the information that is precious to us is in the link basis. And we've been looking at the case of trying to train the LLM to understand XBRL, but I don't think that's the way to go, because to fine-tune the LLM, you need a number of examples that would be too high for that. However, there are other ways to use XBRL, and that's something that is being developed right now in AI. Usually it started with perceptive AI, which is called the few-shot prediction, where AI has been generally trained to understand documents and to understand what a file means in terms of relationships, not necessarily an XBRL file. And then you send it an example of a taxonomy and the instance document, where basically the AI will understand that when you describe the calculation, link base, it meant that the sum needed to be true. And for that purpose, you don't need to optimize the taxonomy at all. The only thing you need is to have a consistent pattern in your taxonomy, right? So keeping yourself close to what other taxonomies do is the only thing required. You don't need to have specific things. You don't even need to have specific names, right, for your arcs. You just need to have consistent patterns that the tool can recognize. I will touch on that on my session this afternoon, on how that works. But basically, just to give you, for those of you that won't be there in the afternoon, the idea is, as a human, if I tell you the name of an animal with a scientific name you've never heard of, you're probably not going to be able to say if a picture of that animal. But if I show you just one photo of that animal, you'll be able to tell whether other photos are also the same animal. You just need one example, right? And that's what is being developed right now in generative AI as well. And basically that's what we need, right? We need just to have pairs of the XBRL taxonomy and the instances where we give the explanation of how that was applied. So I'll give more explanation this afternoon, but basically the answer to your question would be, you don't need to do anything except maybe try to do things that are common practice in other taxonomies as well.
I think that's all we have time for today, already a little bit over. So thank you again very much to the panel and to the audience.